All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you can be here with us tonight. Welcome to Nest Speaker Series, a mindfulness approach to ACEs with Dr. Ravi Raju. My name's Allison Blair. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the programs manager for Nest. Whether you're new to Nest or whether you've worked with us before, we're just really glad to have you here with us this evening. So thanks for being with us. Just a little bit of background on Nest. We were established in 2004, and the organization came about out of a documentary film called Playground, which was produced by George Clooney and Abigail Disney. And since then, we have provided comprehensive violence prevention education to various school settings throughout the United States. Our latest K through 12 curriculum, You Belong Here, takes a comprehensive approach to violence prevention and mental wellness education by addressing the interconnectedness of all forms of violence and harm and uncovering their single root cause, which is the human need for significance and belonging. That's why we called it You Belong Here. So this programming is meant to build empathy and accountability, gratitude, and emotional agility through human-centered education. And it reinforces both violence prevention education, but also social emotional skills, all in search of promoting a culture of belonging. So let's do a little bit of quick housekeeping before we begin. Live transcription has been turned on for this session, and you can access the subtitles or the full transcript from the menu bar below. If you have any issues with that, you can reach out to me or my colleague Libby, who's also on this session, and we can help you troubleshoot that. We will have a Q&A session after the presentation, so please feel free to drop any of your questions into the Q&A box throughout the session, or when we start the Q&A afterwards, and we'll do our best to answer them in the time that we have allotted. Just a quick note, this session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to all of the folks who registered, and it'll be sent early next week sometime. And that'll be sent along with some resources and some more information for you about the subject that we're going to be talking about this evening. Also, please note that while ASL interpretation is not available live, we're very sorry for that. It will be available with the recording that we send out. So rest assured, if you requested ASL interpretation, that will be available with the recording that we send out next week. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. We are so privileged to have Dr. Ravi Raju with us today. Ravi received his undergraduate degree in chemistry and anthropology from Harvard University. He obtained his MD from Baylor College of Medicine and a PhD from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He completed his pediatric residency training at the Boston Combined Residency Program and his fellowship in neonatology at Boston Children's Hospital. He's now on faculty at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School as an attending physician in the neonatal intensive care unit and is an instructor in pediatrics, respectively. He also is a research scientist at the Picower Institute of Learning and Memory at MIT, where he's conducted stress neuroscience research for the last 7 years. Given the increasing appreciation that the social environment is a large driver of health outcomes, he's interested in better understanding how adverse childhood experiences impact health in adulthood. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ravi Raju.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that kind introduction. I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you confirm that you can see it?
Confirmed.
Awesome. I want to start by thanking the folks at Nest, specifically Libby and Allie, for allowing me to be here today and giving us this time and this platform together to be able to share ideas and exchange thoughts. I also want to start with a bit of gratitude. I am a physician and see patients, but primarily a researcher. And I know so many of you in the audience are practitioners who are dealing with daily the effects and the aftermaths of children that are exposed to adversity. And I'm just humbled by the work that is required to just get the job done. And if it was up to me, it would be almost a flip script and I would get to hear from all of your stories and learn from you. But what I hope to do for you today is impart some of the data and the research behind why the work that Nest and all of you are doing is so important. I'd also like to start, because I think many of you on the East Coast probably already had a full, busy, chaotic day, or in the midst of that if you're on the West Coast, with a bit of centering. And so if you'd humor me, let's just take 3 deep breaths together and really ground ourselves in this virtual space and be here for the time that we have together. And if you can close your eyes and do that, that would be great. Starting now. Awesome. I think virtual spaces are great for bringing us from all corners of the globe together, but sometimes they can feel a little bit apersonal. But I'll try my best to make this dynamic, and please engage with questions afterwards. I would love for this to be interactive or as interactive as possible. As Ali mentioned, to me, one of the most fascinating and truly understudied questions in science and really society today is how do the social and environmental factors that govern how we live how do they affect our health and well-being long term? There's a large growing body of epidemiological literature that suggests that really social factors can contribute to up to 70% of all morbidity and mortality in the United States. And while we're growing in our appreciation of this fact is probably why a lot of us are here today. There's still a lot of work to be done on understanding this problem, and then B, most importantly, enacting policy and treatment and intervention plans to handle this reality. I think one data point and one group of studies that really drives this message home are collectively known as the adverse childhood experiences. Many of you may know of this spaces. It's often called the ACEs studies. And really, where it started was in the early 1990s. Epidemiologists really wanted to chronicle and characterize how prevalent childhood adversity was, and importantly, what effects that would have long term. So they started by really thinking about the different forms of adversity that children might be exposed to and came up with these initial kind of 11 categories, and then asked in children that were exposed to these, what were their outcomes long term? And what they found, in my opinion, was really shocking. They found that exposure to ACEs almost in a dose-wise fashion, so that being the more ACEs you're exposed to, the higher risk you have, really led to increased rates of depression, substance use disorder, and anxiety. What was even more striking is when they looked at the top 10 leading causes of death moving out of the mental health space, they found that children who were exposed to significant numbers of ACEs greater than 3 were at increased risk of dying from things that didn't really make a lot of sense at first. Why is it that exposure to adversity is increasing the rates of cancer, nearly doubling their rates, or interestingly affecting the rates of Alzheimer's disease by nearly 5-fold? And so this has really led to a field, the ACEs field, of both understanding mechanistically what's going on. Why is a child who is exposed to adversity such a dramatic increased risk of developing long-term morbidity and mortality? In my opinion, what really elevates this to a public health emergency is how pervasive ACE exposure is. It's now estimated in the United States that up to 65% of all children are exposed to one form of adversity, with up to 20% being exposed to 3 or more, or putting them in that chronic category that really raises their risk of developing these disorders long term as adults. I think another study that really drives home, I'm going to introduce one more study here before we get more into other data and other policy points. But the Bucharest Early Intervention Project is another study that was performed by clinicians actually based at Boston Children's Hospital, and really took advantage of the fact that when the Berlin Wall fell and the USSR collapsed, Eastern Europe underwent a lot of social change in a short period of time. And when Western researchers and clinicians went into Romania, what they uncovered was about 170,000 children that were housed in state-run institutions in which they were provided food, shelter, and water, but really no cognitive or mental or social stimulation. And so, though a tragic circumstance and unfortunate, and there's been a lot done to rectify this since then in the preceding years, what researchers were able to do in the 90s and early 2000s was look at how divergent outcomes were in children that were housed in these institutions versus children that that were raised in the community. And what they found when they first looked at types of attachment that children form was a significant decrease in the rates of secure attachments that were formed by the children that were housed in these institutional orphanages, and a higher rate of disorganized attachment. Interestingly, even being housed in an institution could affect cognitive performance. So when they performed IQ tests on children that were housed in these orphanages versus age-matched individual children from the community, they found that there was a significant impact on their overall cognitive performance. Now, based on the availability, you could imagine 170,000 children that need to find stable and supportive homes is overwhelming for any institution. And because there were just so many children, they had to actually randomize children that could be rescued into foster care or unfortunately would have to remain institutionalized. And as this was going on, researchers were able to see how does moving from being institutionalized or housed in an orphanage where you're deprived of resources and exposed to adversity change as you then move into the foster care system. And what they found was that foster care or fostering children and rescuing them from the institutional environment really promoted a sense of resilience in the terms in the types of attachment that children were able to form. So the more children who were fostered were able to form secure attachments, less were forming these disorganized attachments. And there was actually a rebound in their cognitive performance. So if a child was removed from an institutional home and put into a foster care setup, their cognitive performance was closer to that of children in the community. And when they looked a little bit longer term and looked at rates of disorders, they found that foster care actually was protective, promoted resilience from developing ADHD, depression, and any forms of anxiety. So this, I think, is, while really sobering and sad for the children that were housed in the institution, provides us direct evidence that actually changing the environment, changing the support that a child has, even when faced with early life adversity or early life deprivation, can really help promote resilience. So what's actually going on under the hood? I am a neuroscientist, and if you'll humor me, I will give you two kind of data points that really kind of suggest that this fostering and the changes in the environment are actually changing brain structure and activity. The first point is brain activity. So what researchers did in the study was connect children to EEG monitors and place EEG, perform EEG recordings in which they actually measured the electrical activity of the brain. Many of you may have seen these skull caps on children. They're actually comfortable kind of caps that they wear where each node is an electrode that can directly measure neuronal activity or the communication of brain cells between themselves and the rest of the body. And when they did this, looking at the EEG sort of signals in children that were institutionalized in the orphanages versus their community counterparts, they found that there was a significant increase in the brain activity globally in children that were in the community compared to orphans or children housed in orphanages. So here, this is a kind of a heat map. Imagine you're kind of looking down at the child's head where their nose is kind of at the top at 12 o'clock here. And this is a heat map where higher colors of green, yellow, and red signify more activity. The really cool thing they found was that actually, if you took a child from the orphanage and removed them and rescued them into foster care before 24 months, that those children's EEG signal looked more like their regular community individuals. And unfortunately, if children were rescued after 24 months, their EEG signals did not recover. And that's graphically depicted here in the chart, suggesting that yes, we can promote resiliency by changing the variables of the environment, but there might be actually some critical periods where rescue earlier is better than rescue later. I think differences in support also lead to differences in brain structure. That's one data point that shows EEG activity and the firing of the neurons in your brain can be modulated by your environment or a child's environment. This is a famous study now that has been coined the 30 million word gap, in which researchers really looked at the divergent vocabulary development or language development of children that were housed in an orphanage. This is a study that was done in Kansas City, I believe, in the early 80s, and compared to children that came from high socioeconomic backgrounds, which they sort of labeled professors' children from a nearby university. And what subsequent studies have shown since then is that while all infants kind of have similar brain sizes at birth, the development of brain matter as measured by MRI imaging actually tracks based on what your socioeconomic status is. So children that are exposed to more words, that are exposed to higher socioeconomic stability, tend to have larger brain volume trajectory growth than children that are from low socioeconomic strata. So I think embedded in every depressing finding that stress and adversity can have an impact on the brain function and our risk for developing neuropsychiatric disorders is hidden the pearl of optimism, in the sense that, well, we know that if we change the environment, we can actually rescue this. And that really takes me to the take-home point, the first take-home point that I'd like to leave you with today, which is that providing a supportive environment for a child can really reverse the impact of childhood adversity, with the caveat that perhaps earlier is better. So while changing the environment, the whole environment that a child is in, like taking them from an orphanage to a foster care system, is really an extreme situation and not one that we as a society take lightly. What do we do when we can't really change the macro environment that a child is in? What are some other strategies that can be employed? And for that, I'd like to take a step back and think about the ACEs more holistically. And to me, holistically, the ACEs really represent a breakdown in generational responsibility. If we think about childhood development, children need parental figures, need adult figures to help guide them in development, in how to be productive members of society and how to thrive. And a lot of the ACEs represent the removal of that, or the instability of that, or in worst cases, the manipulation of that in the case of abuse. And societally, there are actually a few buffers that can be leveraged to really rescue that generational breakdown. I think one of the most important ones is teachers and school staff, especially as children enter school age. They're spending almost more of their waking hours in school than they are at home. And then there's a large role here for formal and informal mentors, formal mentors being kind of coaches and NGO sort of sponsored mentorship programs like Big Brother, Big Sister, and informal mentors being just community uncles and aunties in the community. I think one of the sober realities here for me as a physician and a healthcare provider is actually that hospitals fall by the wayside when it comes to being the front line for mental health provision of children. These are a few kind of survey studies that show, both in the general youth population and in youth with confirmed mental health diagnoses, that schools are actually the most common place where children receive mental health support, treatment, counseling, really suggesting that if we need to move the needle on this issue at all, we really need to engage with schools and empower schools to do this, in addition to more traditional systems like outpatient clinics and hospitals. And so, recognizing this, the Center for Disease Control has really created a safe and supportive school environment initiative housed within the Division of Adolescent and School Health. And for this, they really leveraged a lot of their work that was done in the 90s and early 2000s on HIV prevention and lifted it over for mental health. And they sort of recommend three key strategies: providing quality health education, providing a safe and supportive environment, and providing universal health services to children in school as a way of really improving mental health. And in schools implementing this three-pillared approach, the CDC found that children were more likely to engage in less likely to engage in risky behavior, whether it be sex, truancy, or substance use. And so, what do you actually do in the school? What does that actually look like? And so they have roadmaps that they've put out for this, really calling out the partnership that needs to occur between the school and the staff in the school, NGOs and nonprofits that are really developing curriculum and programs and support mechanisms to leverage and sort of roll out, and then technical assistance from the CDC based on a lot of guidelines that are provided here. And all of this, if it raises any questions, is housed on the CDC website, the Center for Disease Control, in their What Works in School program. And I just want to highlight here, I think all of us are here today because of the seminar series that NEST has put on, and NEST, being a violence prevention curriculum program, is really one of these key NGOs that can really kind of leverage into schools and buttress kind of school support and their desire to really help promote improve mental health outcomes through quality health education, linking children to services and providing safe and supportive environments. The CDC is also backing this up with money. So this is a funding announcement. It was an $80 million initiative that is going to run through 2029, in which the CDC wants to receive applications from school districts, both local and state school districts, to think about how to do this in a better way and actually roll out programs to help children. And so I think this funding cycle just closed at the end in April, but they're kind of on a rolling basis, and would encourage any school sort of individuals or school-based folks to think about how they could actually get money to engage in these sort of actions, because I think that's often labor and money are often limiting resources in rolling out innovative programs. This is just a map of all the currently funded CDC initiatives in the What Works in School program. So you can see there's covered across the country in various local school districts. And they've also funded a variety of state health and education agencies. And through this, they've really reflected on the interventions that all of these different agencies and local school districts have promoted and sort of obtained funding for. And they've identified 4 key interventions that can help promote connectedness and improve mental health outcomes in school. The first is really providing physical activity opportunities that give students the time to practice skills such as resolving conflicts, respecting others, cooperating, helping others, encouraging schools to really facilitate interactions that bring teachers and administrators and students together in a supportive space, really speaking to helping that generational breakdown, that if children feel like they have someone in their corner or someone that believes in them, that's going to really promote their resilience to the adversity that they might be having faced or be continuing to face. Really helping students manage their chronic health conditions, and then finally providing professional development to support school staff. So what does this actually look like? I just picked a few examples here. The Spartanburg County School District in South Carolina has received funding to work with the University of South Carolina Child Protection Training Center to really educate teachers and counselors in trauma-informed practices to create a community of resilient schools. And the San Francisco School District has funded a fully staffed wellness center that co-locates social workers, nurses, and community-based partners that can really help provide coordinated health education. And really, as I mentioned, on the CDC website, you can scroll through about 50 or 60 of these different school districts and the programs that they're enacting to get ideas on what might work in your individual context. As we move on from the formal kind of role of teachers in the school district, I do want to spend a little bit of time thinking about mentorship more broadly. And here we can really rely on the work of the Office of Juvenile Justice, which annually releases a juvenile mentoring performance report, which really speaks to their network of funding mentoring programs throughout the country. Their work currently funds programs that help about 91,000 youths, children across the country. When they look at their short-term outcomes in target behaviors, they find that being linked into a mentoring program improves pro-social behavior, decreases antisocial behavior, improves school attendance, stabilizes family relationship, and really helps minimize the risk of substance use. So other programs have really tried to look at this more systematically. So if we take all at-risk youth and then look at who feels like they have a mentor, someone in their corner, who feels like they don't have a mentor, what do they report? And what I hope you can appreciate here is that if at-risk young adults can claim they have a mentor, they're more likely to plan to enroll in college. They're more likely to participate in extracurricular activities, strive for leadership positions, and volunteer in their community. So really short-term outcomes are dramatically different in this population of at-risk children that can benefit from mentorship. I'm really excited to share this recent study that came out of a partnership with an economist, Alex Bell, and the Big Brothers Big Sisters network, looking now at long-term outcomes. So we know mentors are good for short-term outcomes in children. What about long-term outcomes? And so what this economist did was leverage the fact that the Big Brothers Big Sister network is inundated, overflown with children and parents that are requesting mentors for their children, and unfortunately are only able to match a certain percentage. So here we have a similar population of children, but unfortunately some are unmatched and some are matched with a big brother. And when they looked at college attendance rate across different ages of adulthood for people that were matched or unmatched when they were children, they found that being linked with a big brother in a big brother, big sister program was associated with a 15% greater chance of attending college. And over their first 30 years of life, there was a 20% increase in income in individuals that were able to benefit from having a big brother in the big brother, big sister network. This led the authors to estimate that the social channel of mentoring may have the potential to mitigate on the order of a half to two-thirds of the disadvantage that ordinarily hampers low-income children's socioeconomic trajectories in adulthood, which to me is just astounding, and really highlights the second take-home point that I'd like to leave you with today, which is that the single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. I couldn't have said it better, so I just lifted this quote from the Center for the Developing Child, and I think from my own personal experience, it really rings true that if a child feels like someone's in their corner, they're less likely to give up and less likely to fall by the wayside. So we've talked a little bit about the environment, the macro environment. We've talked a little bit about the adults and the role of generational supports that can be leveraged to help children. The title of this talk was Mindfulness and ACEs, and I want to give some time and space for that. The last place I'd like to go with that and to talk about this is really how do we promote resilience at the individual level of the child? Think about in equipping that child with the skills to succeed or thrive despite being faced with adversity. And here in the literature, there are two themes that kind of just keep slapping you in the face. One is the role of physical activity and exercise in promoting resilience. And the second is the role of meditation and mindfulness in helping to promote resilience in children that are exposed to adversity. So there are a lot of studies in these spaces. I just want to highlight two for you to kind of show you what the data actually looks like. This was a randomized controlled trial in school-age children that were unfortunately, I believe, in a district where exercise was no longer part of the daily school curriculum. And so what the researchers did was randomize children to receiving no exercise, their kind of control group, getting exercise intermittently about twice a week, and then exercise daily. And what they found in sort of longitudinal mental health screening was that in children that received exercise daily, they were significantly less likely to exhibit impulsivity and hyperactivity and emotional lability. And I know personally, and many of you probably sort of can relate to, my days go better when I exercise. And I think this just gives credence to what feels just intuitively true. Researchers have also looked at the role of meditation and mindfulness in children. So this is a study that looked at teenagers that were enrolled in an 8-week longitudinal meditation mindfulness program, in which for about 2.5 hours a week, they were taught how to be mindful, how to meditate, and then they were also encouraged to do that at home. And what they found was that compared to the group that was not receiving this curriculum, there was a decrease in anxiety and there was an increase in self-compassion or self-tolerance after this meditation curriculum. What to me is one of the coolest findings in this study is that actually because children were also encouraged or told that they could use these skills at home, they tabulated how much time at home these teenagers spent engaging in mindfulness practice and found that the more minutes of home practice that a child engaged in, the more likely their self-compassion score was likely to improve, suggesting that this is just huge potential rewards if we can really engage and facilitate this capacity building in children. So what is meditation? What is mindfulness? I think we could spend a week-long seminar on this topic alone. And so in a 40-minute seminar, how much can we cover? I just want to leave you with a few thoughts, and I'm thankful that a couple of colleagues of mine who are really experts in this space, Dr. Stephanie Cohen, who's a psychiatrist, really helped me kind of think through this a little bit. And so meditation really is the practice of concentrating on a single process in the present moment without attachment or reaction, really focusing on body sensations, thoughts, emotions, or breath most famously. It's really grounding ourselves in the present and in the moment. It's not emptying the mind or clearing the mind, but really focusing the mind on the present moment. Versus mindfulness, which is really kind of an awareness that arises from paying attention to the present moment with acceptance and non-judgment. It's not really a talent or skill. It's just a state of being or a presence of mind that can be informal or formal per se during a meditation practice. The way that this kind of breaks down conceptually for me is really mindfulness is a capacity, and a meditation is an activity that helps facilitate that capacity of being present in the current moment. Ideally, it's easy to be calm and guided when you're sitting on a mat meditating, but can we take that skill into the day, into our stressors? And really that sort of speaks to mindfulness. So what are the mechanisms through which this is working? Again, I have to pay homage to my sort of background as a neuroscientist, and I've bored you with a few details on brain structure and brain activity. What's really cool about meditation is that the findings are really buttressing what we know about brain stress effects on the brain. So in this study, researchers looked at the brain volume of individuals that engaged in I believe this was a 3-month meditation or mindfulness-based stress reduction, it says MBSR, and then performed serial MRIs looking at the brain volume. And we're actually able to find in a short time in these children that there was an increase in brain volume. And I want to recall to you and bring back from an earlier part of the talk what we learned about stress and adversity and disparity earlier, that increased lower socioeconomic status or children experiencing increased adversity tend to have lower brain volumes. So here meditation can potentially directly buttress that or rescue that. We also talked a little bit about brain activity, thinking about EEGs. And what this research group found was that meditation systematically across all the brain regions, kind of in that heat map that I showed you earlier, was able to increase the activity of those neurons, increase the power of the EEG. And if you'll remember what I showed you earlier was that when researchers looked at orphans compared to community sort of raised children, that the EEG power was decreased in those institutionalized deprived orphans, suggesting that really here this could be a tool that under the hood at a brain structure and function level is actually changing the game. And that's really exciting. When we think about the psychological domain and what could be occurring, meditation and mindfulness, this art of presence, of being, of grounding ourselves in the present moment, really cultivates a self-awareness of emotional and physical states. It really builds tools for self-regulation by creating positive habits and really increasing that space between action and reaction. And it provides practical skills for handling intrusive and negative thoughts. These mechanisms are really summarized nicely in this reference here, and I think Ali will send out all of the full references from this talk later so that you will have access to them. But what they really went through systematically is individual symptoms of trauma-exposed individuals and the mechanisms through which mindfulness and meditation can rectify those symptoms and the evidence for that. In the interest of time, I won't sort of go into each one of these, but the highlights are kind of the points that I mentioned above. So how do we do this? I know a lot of people in the questions that were submitted before were interested in how we actually operationalize this and engage in mindfulness and stress reduction and deal with adversity in schools or at homes. There are so many ways that this can be done, and there are so many curricula and so many approaches to teaching mindfulness, and so it would be really hard to cover those in a 40-minute talk. But what I want to provide you with is resources. So there are 2 reviews here that really go through systematically on a national level what individual mindfulness programs have been rolled out in schools and for children, and what the results of those have been that could allow you to sort of pick and choose how you would like to go about thinking about this. And we have an option here. Nest, in their violence prevention curriculum, really have thought a lot about how do we build emotional fortitude, how do we promote resilience, and they really, in line with the literature, have come back to these 3 M's that I was talking about earlier: mindfulness, meditation, and movement or physical activity. But how you do that really needs to be tailored to the age that a child is. So you could imagine how you teach mindfulness to a 3rd grader might be very different than how you teach it to a 7th and 8th grader, where you can get into more nuanced concepts and really tackle challenging things that come up in a different way and with some more maturity. And through age-based curriculum, the folks at Nest are really working on this. I do want to sort of have an asterisk here, because I do think that teaching trauma-informed practices does require time, space, and training. First and foremost is the a goal of trying to promote a safe space where children can feel safe and supported, really kind of highlighting a lot of the research that I've shown you over the course of this talk as being the foundation upon which some of this can happen. Because we like to think of meditation and mindfulness as having only benefits, but the reality is there are also risks, and there's a growing body of literature that talks about the risks of asking trauma survivors, and particularly children, to inhabit their body, focus on their breath, focus on their sensation. It might bring up, it might cause them to relive their trauma or make them face uncomfortable, difficult feelings that they don't want to face. And if they don't feel safe or it's not done in the right way, it could actually have harm and be a detriment to their recovery. And so really, I think one of the leaders in this space that's thinking about trauma-sensitive mindfulness is David Trulevin, and I would point you to this book on trauma-sensitive mindfulness, practices for safe healing. He kind of highlights key principles of trauma-sensitive mindfulness. One being staying within a tolerable window and avoiding extremes of arousal states, really speaking to what I just mentioned, that if a child who's experienced trauma is starting to relive that trauma and become hyper aroused in a meditation that's supposed to be calming and grounding, that you need strategies for how to kind of handle that situation. And so one of those could be shifting attention to support stability. And then really keeping the body in mind, because children and individuals that have suffered from trauma or experienced trauma often are disassociated from body sensations and experiences. And as you try to connect those links by focusing on the body or the breath, that can lead to some difficulties. And really, this is a practice in relationships. So children require coaching and training in how to do this, and that requires them to trust the person that they are engaging in this practice with. And so it's a practice in relationship for them to engage in this. And of course, as always, we need to understand the social context that our children are coming from, that might be reaching the mat with, and take that into context. And then there's a few myths. I'm not trying to sort of smell snake oil here. I don't think mindfulness is a panacea or catch-all solution. It's really one tool in a large toolbox that we can leverage. Another myth is that the breath is neutral. As I just mentioned, for some trauma survivors, feeling the breath can actually trigger trauma re-experiences, and that needs to be thought about. And then the myth that mindfulness is enough to heal trauma. It's a tool, but it needs to be integrated into an effective healthcare system, an effective school, an effective home life, and a macro environment to really transform a child's potential. And so that really takes me to the third take-home point, which is that I truly believe that empowering children to take control of their own well-being can really reverse the impact of childhood trauma. We know that from the data, looking at exercise and meditation and giving children these skills to really take their future into their own hands. And we know that from the stories of survivors. And so how do we integrate all of this? The Center for the Developing Child has a nice schematic that really highlights 3 strategies that can help promote the thriving of children and then the adults that care for those children. And I hope over the course of these 40 minutes or so, you've seen that we've touched on a little bit of these with our take-home points. So providing a supportive environment, really changing the macro environment, reducing the primary source of stress is one strategy, but often the hardest and the least leverageable. We can support responsive relationships. So the single most common factor for children to develop resilience is one stable, committed relationship from an adult. And then we can strengthen core skills that children have, empowering children to take control of their own well-being through exercise, meditation. I'm sure there are others, but those are just 2 examples that are highlighted in the literature that it can really reverse the impact of childhood trauma. So with that, I'd like to pause and really leave time for questions. I really want to thank you all for your attention, interest, and most importantly, just express my gratitude for all of your collective efforts in really helping children in the community and the adults they will one day become. And this has become really salient for me for so many years as a medical student and resident and now researcher. This was in theory, but I have a 4-month-old son now, and it's really now in practice that I'm starting to see just how difficult ensuring resilience and promoting the welfare of this next generation is. So with that, I'd like to stop and hand the floor over back to Allie.
Thank you so much, Ravi. We have a lot of questions. I'm excited that we have a fair amount of time and to get to them. But please do, folks, please keep dropping your questions in the Q&A box. Hold on, let me add myself a spotlight here. There we go. Okay. Technology. Keep dropping your questions in the Q&A box and we will get to them. Ravi, thank you so much. We've gotten a couple comments already and that people are just very grateful for how you have presented this potentially very difficult topic in such an easy to understand and accessible way. So
Oh,
we're just
thank you.
incredibly grateful to you for being here with us. I guess, I mean, we have a lot of questions that you all submitted prior in your registration. So, and they kind of fall into a couple different buckets, but I might just bop around a little bit. I think maybe we start, we kind of go back to the basics a little bit and ask, someone asked, Sherry asked, how do ACEs manifest in the different age groups? And I would maybe add a first question to that of like, are there indicators that a child has experienced ACEs, is experiencing ACEs that are sort of things that folks can look for that are sort of common indicators that a child has experienced this?
Yeah. Um, Such a good question, and yeah, thank you for. I feel just gratitude to you and the community here that has gathered. So appreciate the time. I think what's really difficult about thinking about this at the level of symptoms is all of the symptoms tend to be nonspecific. So as you can see from the Romanian orphanage study, it's not just that children who are in deprived conditions behave in a way you would expect, kind of avoidant attachment styles. They also like are failing on IQ tests and falling behind cognitively. And so really what I think makes the most sense as a pediatrician and probably someone in school seeing development in real time is to have a catch-all for children that are not meeting milestones or acting sort of different than the norm. And then when that occurs, digging into kind of thinking about what might be causing that. Because a lot of times it might not be ACEs. A child might have a hearing difficulty, and that's why they're falling behind on language, not that they're in a home where they're not being read to or being sort of provided appropriate language, age appropriate support. So it's really, I think the detective work comes in once you've identified someone falling off a curve or acting sort of outside the norm. And when then I think the difficult question becomes for all of us, including healthcare providers, when you realize that it's an ACE, it's adversity in the environment, and here you are sitting in the hospital or in the school or somewhere. Like, how do you take action? What do you do? And that's where I tend to get a little bit depressed because it's hard. There's not a lot right now. That's what we're all trying to do and think about. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Are there, does it manifest differently in a younger child versus a teenager from your experience?
Um, yeah, for sure. I think there is the key feature there is awareness that emerges
Mhm.
as a child develops. And so um, the ability, like I've always thought that dealing with infants and toddlers is a little bit like veterinary medicine. You like don't know what's wrong. You just know something's wrong, right? And then you've got
Right.
to figure it out. Whereas even children, adults, teenagers that have experienced trauma might not be willing to talk about it or really address it, but are more likely to give voice to the exposure that has led to the outcome that you're hoping to intervene on.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking, as you were talking earlier as well, something that we at Nest really try to focus on is um understanding like behavioral when kids are having behavioral challenges, that it doesn't always necessarily mean that they might have been labeled a bad kid or something in the past, that understanding that behavioral issues can absolutely be a symptom that a child is experiencing ACEs, has experienced trauma, has experienced something difficult that is interfering with their ability to like regulate their emotions in a healthy way, and thus have like healthier interpersonal relationships. Would you say that you've kind of seen that borne out? I don't know if you have like as part of your research has been the sort of behavioral element of of ACEs and how children who have experienced it, how they might behave in interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, I think the classic association with ACEs is impulsivity
Mm,
and oppositional defiant disorder, um, but but children also become withdrawn and antisocial and asocial, and especially if they develop that avoidant attachment style and just feel like they can't trust anyone, pull
yeah,
away. So it's hard to really create labels on how they kind of might react or might develop as a result of being exposed to trauma.
yeah, that makes
If there's an
sense.
easy fix, that's great. I mean, one of my favorite stories from being a pediatric resident working in a clinic in a underserved area was a child was brought to the clinic because they were uh, refusing to follow directions and always acting out, and it turned out that he just had wax impacted ears and couldn't hear. And his school performance and his reviews completely resolved once we sent him to an ENT doctor to kind of address his hearing issues. So that's why that hearing one always stays salient for me. So it's awesome if there's an easy fix, and I think it's right. We shouldn't jump to conclusions and assume that every child that acts a certain way must have been exposed to a terrible situation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Um, Something that someone just dropped in a comment, and this person, I believe, also asked a comment in the registration. William asks, age appropriate games based on more body centered somatic perspectives as opposed to cognitive verbal based games could also be important. Um, what's There seems to be no mention of the bigger context of play. What is your perspective about the role play and creativity might address those with higher ACE scores?
yeah, I think that's such a good point, and I should learn more about that. I think I know a little bit about play therapy, and it's very useful and critical, especially in that pre kind of awareness kind of age frame that we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
Um, but also, what I think a lot of these things do, as William is alluding to, is inhabit you in the body, right? The somatic therapy, like, and a lot of that is what is also done by physical exercise and meditation, right? Physical exercise when you're running and you know you just can't, all you can think about is like ending your run. You're present, you're in your moment, you're feeling your sweat, you're feeling your muscles tense up. When you're meditating and you're doing a body scan or breath, you're focusing on your body. And I think what a lot of somatic therapy, play therapy, relates to, though I'm not an expert in it, is kind of a similar principle of grounding you in sensation, grounding you in the moment, in the
Mhm.
present. So I think it's super helpful, and I'm aware of a few studies that have looked at play therapy and improvements in behavioral outcomes. Know less about the interaction with ACEs, but it would be interesting to learn more about that and look into.
Mhm. Um, Hope has asked, how does ACEs affect children with diagnoses like autism or Down syndrome?
Oh wow, yeah. Also another such another good question. I think historically we've tended to think about individuals that have limited capacity as also having limited ability to integrate experiences. And I think that's a little bit naive and a little bit kind of historic thinking. And like anyone can experience trauma regardless of what their capacity or their sort of the way that they interact with the environment is. Down syndrome, I put in a little bit of a different category than autism. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder. That is occurring at the chromosome genetic level that starts in utero and develops. Autism is a little bit more complex. There's like a genetic, but also an environmental component. And what's interesting to think about there is when you have an autistic child that is sort of meeting the criteria of a diagnosis of autism, like what led to the autism in the first place? Were there issues or differences in the environment that, had they been modified, could have prevented that diagnosis? Because there are therapies that can be leveraged based on that could potentially help. And so that might make you think about interventions in a child that is autistic a lot differently than you would in someone who is non-autistic. Um,
Mm. Um, I guess maybe now we can talk a little bit about adults with ACEs because children who experience ACEs grow up to become adults who have had that experience as well. Um, Hillary asked a really interesting question. Are some of the symptoms and feelings I'm experiencing as an adult some of the same symptoms and feelings I represented as a child?
Oh yeah, that question hits close to home for me. I think I've long said this, but I am just genuinely puzzled how, as a society, we view children that have experienced traumatic experiences with pity and openness, and then shun the adults that they become. Like they were those children, you know. And I just finished reading Rough Sleepers, which talks about the chronic homeless population in Boston, where that 90% of the homeless population within Boston were abused or experienced ACEs as children. And so, yeah, I care a lot about this issue because I think it when we really integrate that life course perspective into how we handle society, it breeds compassion for adults, and it breeds us to give space for our own injuries, our own trauma, and also that of others, and be a little bit more forgiving in how judgmental we are, as me included can be at times. So I think that is definitely true. That what people and adults feel in adulthood can really trace back to kind of really nascent things that maybe even occur before they were conscious of have conscious memories formed. The most critical period of your time is in utero in the first year of life, and none of us remember that period of time, but it can have a huge dramatic effect. And so there, I think, these tools, we didn't talk a lot about therapy. I kind of stayed away from that because I'm not a psychiatrist or a therapist. But that's where I think that can have a really important role in trying to uncover um, what might be leading to why you are the way you are as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got another question that I think sort of piggybacks off of that from Kana. What can someone's adulthood look like for someone who experienced multiple forms of ACEs and didn't receive the support in their upbringing? Although someone can develop great life skills and values from childhood adversities, they can still face struggles as they go through life. How can someone handle it while wanting to prevail?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what comes to mind is a lot of the tools that I uncover in my pediatric work are not actually pediatric specific, right? I think putting these practices into my own life, uh, daily exercise, meditation, have really allowed me to build resilience and come back from my own kind of experiences as a child. So I think all of it can be leveraged to really help promote resilience. And we didn't talk a lot about adult stress and how adult, if individuals have different backgrounds, they might be primed for failure in situations that don't always promote failure. So that's a classic scenario that is described in the literature of kind of decreased reserve, basically to handle the stressors of adult life because of an initial kind of experience. You're fine, you're fine, you're fine until you're not.
Yeah.
And so I think mobilizing all the tools in our arsenal that can exist to try and heal from these effects, I think, are age independent.
Mm-hmm. Um, you mentioning stress reminded me of our conversation that we had a couple of days ago about um how about toxic stress, which I know is part of the work that you do. It's not necessarily something that we've talked on specifically in tonight's presentation, but thinking about the difference between toxic stress or potentially, trauma and the general stress of life. And is there crossover between like ways that we can cope with um, trauma or ACEs and ways that we can cope with some of the just stress that happens to us on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, yeah, no, very interesting. I think I'm gonna like, if you let me go and think about it for a sec, not based on the
Yeah.
literature, but like just thinking about it, I sort of feel like my mind goes to when we experience things in adults or experience sensations or emotions, are we have a natural a desire to know why and where it comes from, and oftentimes like we don't know why. This is like the field of interoception, and Lisa Feldman Barrett, a professor at Northeastern, is an expert in this and has a beautiful book that I would highly recommend on how emotions are made, and talks about the classic case where she went on a first date and had butterflies in her stomach and thought it meant that she had met the man of her dreams, but it turned out that she had like a GI bug and was sick for 3 days. And so we our mind kind of like tries to rationally seek for answers for these emotions that we're feeling. And I think trauma, both recent and remote, or stress, both recent and remote, are plugins to that emotional state that we're experiencing now. And so exploring that, understanding that, and then also engaging in daily activities that help promote resilience, I think are going to be the key strategies. I feel like I keep coming back to that. I apologize, but that to me is like that's like um, I feel like a pillar that feels important. Recognizing and giving space to the fact that not everyone has the time and the luxury and the ability and the resources to be able to do that. So then the question becomes, well, how do we, for people that can't do that or can't be empowered to do that, what are the impediments to being able to do that, and how can we help support them
Yeah.
to engage in what they feel like will promote their resilience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Another question, and I know we are coming up on time, and I want to get to just a couple more questions before we wrap up. Um, Another question that I really appreciated was one from Natalie about mindfulness and a sort of practical application of mindfulness with young people. So Natalie asks, how can we incorporate mindfulness into our work with teenagers who might quickly shrug it off as just another adult imposed demand? So is how do we make it clear or engage young people in the importance of mindfulness, when they are in school and they might just see this as, oh, my teacher just wants me to sit quietly for 5 minutes and not talk. How are there ways to um, that you have found to sort of get kids into the idea of mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I keep thinking of that like one dot in that graph I showed of the teenagers that engaged in home practice who like did like 500 minutes in of home meditation and then had the biggest change in the self-compassion score. Like, how do we get everyone to be that person? Um, and it's so tricky because like, how do I get myself to be more like that? Like I want to exercise every day and I want to meditate every day, and building that agency and capacity even when I have the resources to do it can be challenging. Um, I think for children in particular, you're right, there has to be a receptivity about it. I think one of the things that I've heard from it's because the people that engage in meditation practice with children, which I don't do, is um, there's there's almost instant positive feedback. Like in the first session of like sitting for 10 minutes and doing a body scan or breathing and then reflecting like, hey, how do you feel now? And you're like, oh, actually, like I feel a bit better, like I was nervous before this talk and I took 3 breaths with you all, and then I felt, okay, we're in this space together, and I was able to proceed. So kind of reflecting and using that positive feedback can help build and ingrain the skills, and
Yeah.
create kind of buy-in. And then I think I am not on this space. I know a lot of people are trying to like leverage social media and influencers to like change kids' attitudes and perceptions. So I wonder if there's space for that. Like, let's do it in a positive way. And I do know that there are like influencers that talk about wellness and mindfulness and meditation. So kind of leveraging the tools that they use, like TikTok and Instagram to do that could be one strategy.
Yeah. Um, well, I am so sorry. Well, I feel like we could talk for another hour. Um,
Yeah.
but we're coming up on time here. So I just wanted to let you all know that we're so grateful that you've joined us this evening. And Ravi, I want to thank you so much genuinely for joining us. We're so grateful to you for your time and your expertise, and um, just appreciate you sharing your work with us and sharing your time with us. And we're just so glad that you could be here with us today.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for creating the space, and happy to. I think all the resources will go out later, so I'll include all the. We can include all the papers and the books that we talked about, and then also if folks have questions that were not addressed, I'm happy to. You can connect us, and I'm happy to have a chat offline too. So want to really make myself available to the community. So,
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, like Ravi said, we will be sending out a a follow-up probably early next week. I'm going to drop into the chat a link to a post-webinar survey. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, that's also where you can request a certificate. If you'd like a certificate for attending this webinar, you can request that there. Just let us know, how we can serve you, what you're interested in hearing more about. And I want to take the time to just let you all know that Nest, as Robbie mentioned in his presentation, we have a wide range of programming that's available to schools, districts, community organizations. That it really ranges from in-classroom curriculum to workshops for parents, teachers, school staff. And I'm going in the follow-up, I'll be sending some information on our programming, but please reach out to us and let us know if you'd like to schedule a call with us to learn more about our programming. We'd really love to hear from you about what would best serve you and your community's needs, what we can do to really provide you with some resources that would be helpful to you as you work with kids. So that sort of brings us to time. So I want to again thank Dr. Ravi Raju for joining us today. I want to thank you all for being with us, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening.
thank you, everyone.